The following podcast is a deep, shallow dive production.
And you're gonna love it.
Okay, let's go.
All right, I am definitely the third most intelligent person on this podcast today, for sure. Because I've got my guys, actually, you guys, this is great. So on Instagram, we've got a group chat, the three of us. The one and only Elijah Kahlenberg is back, and his partner in crime, Jadd Hashem. Jadd, is that how you pronounce your last name, Hashem?
Hashem is technically correct,
Hashem,
but most people
okay.
say Hashem because of the Jewish, the Hebrew coming out there. But
Okay,
so I'm
all right,
used
all right.
to either. Yeah,
That was the Hebrew coming. That was the Hebrew coming out in me.
that's right.
Exactly. Ray, you're biased. You got, I'm kidding. But it means the name
exactly.
Hebrew. So it's the name for God. And so a lot of people
I love that.
say, so Jadd's Hebrew name, technically, because Jadd in Hebrew would be Yod, which would be hand, and Hashem would be God. So his name would be Hand of God in Hebrew, believe it or not. It's a pretty dope name.
That is a very dope name. So the three of us have a group chat on Instagram, and I named it the UT Think Tank because both of these guys, Elijah just recently graduated from the University of Texas, and then Jadd is finishing up, I think, your senior year there. All right, listen. Elijah's been on before, you guys. You know that. Jadd is really his partner in crime, and these guys have known each other, well, I guess maybe for 4 or 5 years from Texas, and I'm going to let them explain that a little. They co-founded an organization called Atidna International, and I'm going to have them take us through that. And then we're going to get into just a great conversation today about really the generational mindset of Gen Z. I've honestly been blown away by what I've seen from Gen Z. We're going to talk about Zoran Mondani in New York, who's running for the mayor of New York. We're going to talk about Syria and what's going on in Syria over there. I haven't talked too much about that on the podcast, but I do want to touch on that because it's just becoming another completely puppet state, and the people that are suffering are innocent civilians. This time, a lot of Christians and, the Muslims are going to get blamed, and we'll talk all about that. But really, more importantly, we're just going to let this conversation kind of go where it goes with two young guys that I just have so much love and respect for, and I'm so glad to have the three of us on here. Jadd, why don't you start off, since the Deep Shallow Dive audience doesn't know you, just give us a quick little background, a little blurb, what you're all about, your religion, all that stuff.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Ray, for having me on. And it's Elijah, it's been a while since I've seen you too. So it's kind of a reunion for us as well, I guess you could say. But yeah, my name is Jadd Hashem, and I am a senior at the University of Texas at Austin, currently studying government and Middle Eastern studies. Hopefully going to be going to law school very soon, actually studying for the LSAT, which I take in just under 2 weeks. So got that going on, but of course, taking some time off for this podcast that we got, which I'm always loving. But yeah, I'm Palestinian-American. I was born in Dallas, Texas, and I've lived in the United States my whole life. And so for me, it's actually kind of a delicate balance between being very much proudly Palestinian and being proudly American. Some people there's almost this idea to where you can't be both in one just because of how the media portrays Palestinians or Arabs as a whole. But no, I'm very proud and blessed to be of Palestinian heritage, but to be born and raised in the U.S. I am somebody who I've championed Palestinian human rights for a long time. My family specifically comes from Nablus in the West Bank, and I have a very, very large family. I have aunts and uncles that are even older than the state of Israel. They're in their 80s, and so a large family there. I have cousins who are almost as old as my parents. It's just kind of how it works in large Palestinian families. But for me, growing up in the U.S., I always cherished my Palestinian identity because I really felt that it was my culture. It was my identity that I had that really I couldn't find a lot of people to relate to. I grew up in Dallas, Fort Worth, and where I went to school, there were no Palestinians, almost no Arabs, and not even really many Muslims. And so it was really hard to kind of connect with people. In fact, I would argue I probably went to school with more Jews than any Muslims and for me growing up, one of the things that I always valued when it came to Palestine was understanding that being pro-Palestine is not anti-Jewish and not anti-Semitic. I grew up around Jewish people. My parents always emphasized to me that this is not a matter of religion. It's not a matter of race. This is a political dispute that we have when it comes to the occupation and of course now the genocide that's been occurring. And so for me, I have all the love and respect in the world for our Jewish brothers and sisters, including Elijah, who I got to meet a few years ago. We met at UT actually, and he is obviously, as Ray, you know, he's a phenomenal, intelligent man who really, I think, will be. This is a guy who will be, I think, the face of young Jewish Americans for some time. I think you'll see him going a lot of places.
Yeah.
And so I'm just very grateful for that partnership that we formed a few years ago. And currently I serve as the vice president of Atidna International, although I'm now the president of the UT Austin chapter. I'll be the president for this year. And we specialize, of course, in dialogue and peace events. Elijah, I'm sure, has touched on this sort of stuff before. But that's really my brief introduction there. I'm very grateful to be on. And yeah, lots to talk about in the world. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
So much.
Let me ask you this. So when you were growing up and you were saying that, you know, you really grew up around Jewish kids your age more than Palestinian, because obviously there were none. What were those kids like with you? Like, did they look at you differently? And I bring that up because, man, I know both of you have watched the documentary Israelism, and I am going to put a link in the show notes for that documentary. That documentary was done by a Jewish gal, I believe in Los Angeles, Simone Zimmerman, I think is her name. And she's either founded or co-founded that If Not Now organization. Their work is unbelievable. But that documentary, I've watched it twice now. It is just so good because here is a LA Jewish girl who grew up with like the absolute almost like brainwashing 101 of what Zionism is, and then goes over to Israel. And it's insane to me how she's like, wait a minute, this is not jiving. So what were those kids like that you grew up with? Were they open-minded like you, or were they very, I guess, drinking the Kool-Aid?
There was definitely a lot of skepticism, I would say, about people like myself. You know, when you're growing up, whether you're a young kid or you're a teenager, you don't really want to bring up the conflict, let's say, to
Right.
people. But what I always felt what I always felt, frankly, is that it was a lot more acceptable to be openly Jewish and present as Jewish and celebrate Jewish holidays and whatnot than for me to tell people that I was Muslim or to tell people that I was Palestinian. In fact, like from a young age, and I know a lot of Palestinians can relate to me when I say this, my father specifically would always tell me growing up to not say that I was Palestinian, to say that I was Lebanese or Jordanian or something else, because Palestinian, we live in the United States, right? In a post 9/11 world. And it's very difficult at times. And I've faced prejudice at a young age. And some of that comes just with people being young and being stupid and there's ignorance. But some of it also comes from the parents, and the parents don't change much. And some of the kids kind of follow that trajectory. But, you know, the Jewish kids that I knew definitely were in the more staunch Zionist camp. They, at least to me, were fairly friendly and at least cordial, but definitely it was not a comfortable position to be in when talking about Israel-Palestine. I felt that really there was a challenge there. And as much as I had no issue with Jewish people whatsoever, it definitely felt like a lot of them had issues with me or my sort of people, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But I think, Ray, as you mentioned, like Israelism is kind of a good example of how people can grow out of that and how people can actually transform. And so there's actually so many good groups now that have even formed in just the last few years. Groups, like you said, like If Not Now, that are Jewish-based groups that do tremendous work promoting this discourse and promoting a pro-Palestine agenda. But it used to not really be that way in my eyes. And so it's nice to see this sort of change. And now more than ever, I still, you know, most Jewish people I speak to, frankly, are fairly closed-minded. But there's a growing sense, I would say, at least in America, to where the dynamic is starting to shift. Although I know
Yeah.
Elijah can definitely speak on that more than I can.
Yeah.
And definitely your generation. All right, Elijah, what do you
Yeah.
think?
I mean, Jadd's completely right. On the subject of Israelism, the story is very accurate for the vast majority of Jewish Americans. I mean, growing up, going to Hebrew school, we were fed the propaganda from a very early age. I remember, I think I was 12 years old. So this would be 2014, which was Operation Cast Lead in Israel. So another one of the quote unquote mowing the lawn bombing campaigns of Gaza. And I remember one of my teachers coming in so angry at that moment, right? He was so angry at Palestinians. He didn't call them Palestinians. He only called them Arabs with the intent to erase their identity. And he said that they're inherently terroristic, they're barbaric, they're anti-Semitic, And I was enraged by that, right? I went home to my mom, told her about this. And she calmed me down and said, rather than listening to someone who has a vested interest in maligning the Palestinian people, how about you actually go speak to a Palestinian for yourself and learn about their identity, their history, and their culture from their own mouths? And that's what I did. The way I broke the propaganda was simply talking with Palestinians, and by understanding that by having the conversation, we learn we're human. We're not all
Yeah.
that different. In fact, we're brothers. We're not others. We're not enemies. We're one family. My first conversation with a Palestinian was a guy named Ahmed. It was in high school, and he wore this beautiful keffiyeh, a black and white keffiyeh. And I remember the first thing I said to him was, wow, that reminds me as a Jewish individual of our talit, of our prayer shawl. And he never had heard of a talit before. So I showed him some pictures, and he's like, wow, that really is similar. And so that just sparked a 2 hours long conversation between me and him about our two peoples. And we said, oh my gosh, we are so similar. Everything about our two cultures is more alike than different. And that's how we humanize each other. That's how we break through the propaganda, by understanding the story of the other, and by understanding that that other is more similar to us than to anyone else. So, I mean, Israelism showcases that. My story
Yeah.
showcases that. And that's how you really break down this intense campaign we've been fed for years to show Palestinians as less than human. And it's not true. They're more similar to us than to anyone else. And they're not only humans, they're our brothers.
Yeah, absolutely. This was when you were in high school, you had that experience?
Yeah. Yeah. Freshman year of high school.
By the way, kudos to your parents, man. They really, how was it that your parents were so progressed with this, or so different thinking? What helped them maybe break out of the mold? Do you know?
Partly background. So my mother's side is Sephardic Jewish, and for Sephardic Jews, it's a very, very different atmosphere in Israel-Palestine, especially in the early years of the state.
Okay.
In 1948, from around 1960, there was a lot of oppression towards Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews, and that happened to my family. And
And by
so
the way, what does Sephardic even mean? I don't really even know what that means.
that's a great question. A lot of people talk about Israel Palestine, but they don't really have the
Yeah.
terminology or historical basis. So I need to catch myself sometimes and explain these terms. Sephard in Hebrew means Spain. Sepharad means Spain. And so the Jews who were expelled from Spain in 1492, they went to the Ottoman Empire, they went to North Africa. They are Sephardic Jews. Mizrahi means Eastern in Hebrew, right? And so they're the Jews that weren't in Spain, but they've always been in the Middle East, right? In Iraq and these other places. And so Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews are not Ashkenazi Jews. Ashkenazi Jews are those who were in Central and Eastern Europe.
Okay.
They're the browner Jews, the ones with a little more melanin. But that's my mother's side. And they had a very tough time in the early years of Israel. There was a lot of Orientalist hatred by the Ashkenazi establishment, government, and leadership. And it got so bad, many of them left. A lot of them grew up in shanty towns. They worked the poorest jobs, that if Palestinians weren't working those jobs, that it was typically Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews.
Okay.
And so Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews are very interesting politically. Some of them are the most extreme Zionists you will meet, right? Ben Gvir, he's an Iraqi Jew, right? And he is as far right as they come. And the reason for that is they have a lot of animosity towards Arabs and Palestinians. They believe that Arabs expelled them from Iraq and all these Arab countries, and they want to take out their anger on Arabs, and they do that through Palestinians. And to add insult to injury, because they were excluded by the quote unquote leftist Ashkenazi political movements in the early state of Israel, right? Think David Ben Gurion, he was a socialist, right? That was primarily Ashkenazi Jews leading that. They gravitated towards the more right wing, right, movements in Israel, right? Those of Menachem Begin, right? Those of the Lehi leaders, right? Those were the political movements they more gravitated towards. And so they from the beginning were very right wing. And because of that, they had a lot of animosity towards Palestinians. But at the same time, they had animosity towards the Ashkenazi leftist establishment. And so Mizrahi Jews, they can go in either direction. They can either be really far right or they can be really far left. There was a movement in the early years of Israel called the Mizrahi Black Panther campaign, basically, based on the American, right? And they really took inspiration from them and brought that to Israel-Palestine to seek their own liberation. So very cool, diverse history there. But that's the fold where my mother is coming from. Definitely that vein of history.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Okay. All right. Let's talk about like campus life and really what your generation is feeling right now, because, you know, it's interesting that obviously when I went to college, I mean, politics were just nowhere on no one's radar. And I know right now politics are probably not on some people's radar that are attending college, you know, like the frat life people and things like that probably don't care. But I will say there's a lot of people that really do care. And like, obviously all the protests that took place last summer and all that. I know you guys were a part of that. Is politics really, and I guess I should say world affairs and what's going on, particularly obviously genocide in Gaza, maybe Russia, Ukraine? Like, is this stuff that's really prevalent on campus right now?
I'll take this one, I
Yeah.
suppose, because I'm the one on campus
Yeah.
right
You're on
now.
campus.
So
Yeah.
yeah, well, it definitely these issues are very relevant on college campuses, and I've always said that I think that campuses should be the bastions of free speech, right? And that's what we partly do at Atidna, having these conversations. I would say right now, at least in this moment, of course, this differs by the state, let's say. So at UT in the state of Texas, one of the biggest issues right now is with the redistricting that's happening,
Yeah.
that just passed in some of the Texas legislature. So that's been sort of, I think, the more dominant trend for right now. However, if there's any issue over the last 2 years that has struck the most people, it's definitely Israel, Palestine, and specifically the genocide in Gaza. Even Russia, Ukraine, for that matter. Yes, people, of course, talk about it, they care about it, but this is an issue to where the United States is not actively funding a genocide, for example.
Got it.
And
Got
so
it.
people can have their views on Russia, Ukraine, and NATO expansion and all this stuff, and I'm here to have that dialogue anytime. But the fact of the matter is that Gaza right now, it's just so apparent because it's impossible to avoid. And, frankly, I think that people, when they're on social media, I think that people should see what's happening. I think that as uncomfortable as it is to see children who are bloodied and limbs blown off, this is the reality of what's happened. And this is American tax dollars, right? I mean, and this is what we've seen, I think now it's a growing trend across both aisles, sorry, both sides of the aisle here in terms of where we see the American Israeli relationship taking place. But the left has always sort of been more in the pro-Palestine camp, but now it's, I think, accelerated even more, including a lot of progressive Jewish voices who I think may have previously been still more kind of on the Zionist side of things, to the point now where even on the right, of course, we've talked many times about this sort of isolationist approach, this Tucker Carlson, even Marjorie Taylor Greene approach of saying, hey, I don't want America funding the deaths of tens of thousands of children in Gaza. Someone like Thomas Massey, who I think has been a superstar, really. And honestly, I would not be surprised if they really try to oust him as hard as possible, which I think they're really going to do. They're going to push him out as fast as they can.
I think so too.
So,
I think so
yeah,
too.
They
You know,
already
you know
are.
what's interesting about the right and the left right now? Marjorie Taylor Greene. Yeah, I give her a lot of credit. She's making a lot of noise. Now, she is. She's making a lot of noise. I give her credit. But then it's funny. It's like, where are the Democrats now? They're not making noise. You know what I mean? You've got Marjorie Taylor Greene being the loudest voice of what are we doing in Israel? Why do we keep giving them money? Why do we keep doing this? And then I look at the entire Democratic Party and I'm like, hey, where are you guys? Let alone, where's Barack Obama? Where's Joe Biden? Where's Kamala Harris? Where's Nancy Pelosi? Where's Chuck Schumer? Hakeem Jeffries, forget it. That dude is just like, he's so on the payroll. Him and Cory Booker, those guys are so on the payroll. It's insane. But, it's like, I was having this discussion.
Can't even get Bernie Sanders to say the word genocide. I mean, let alone that list. We can't even get Bernie to say the G word, man. It's
You know
terrible.
what? That's another great point. I mean, Bernie will curse out Netanyahu all day long, but that's kind of where it ends. And you know what's funny? I even found myself over the progression of this for many months. I was always like blaming Netanyahu. I was like Netanyahu, Netanyahu, Netanyahu. But honestly, if you really want to call a spade, and if you want to have real talk, you got to scope it above him. It's not just him. Yes, he is the centerpiece and he's the spokesperson. And really, he's the central figure that's catching all the heat. And all of that's by design, but it's more than that. It's absolutely more than that.
You got to go to the root
Okay,
cause. You got to go to the
let,
root
let,
cause of Zionism.
yeah, the root cause, exactly, the root cause. And let me ask you this, and Elijah, you answer first. I mean, do you think at the end of the day, is it just the land? Do they just want to expel, whether that's through genociding or relocation or whatever? Do they just want all Palestinians out of, I mean, the West Bank's the crown jewel. You and I have talked about this before, but out of the West Bank, out of Gaza, and do they want that to be just a pure Jewish state for the sake of having one? What do you think the root cause is?
Yeah, I mean, the Zionist movement early on understood the primary struggle in this land is over demographics, right? If you're going to have a piece of territory and call it a Jewish state, you need a solid demographic Jewish majority. And as soon as you annex Gaza and the West Bank, that's an additional 5 million Palestinians on top of the 2 million Palestinian Arabs who have citizenship in Israel, alongside 7 million Jews in the land. It'll be a 7 to 7 figure, right? So if you want to have more territory and call this a Jewish state, you have to expel. You have to expel. It's the only way to get this done. And so day one, what did the defense minister of Israel say was going to happen in Gaza? No food, no water, no electricity. The intent was starvation off the bat, right? That was the goal. What's the purpose of starvation, right? To get people to leave, to either mass kill them or to get them to leave, right? Typically both. So in my eyes, the only goal of the government at this point is to expel Palestinians. It's to annex and expel and to get as few Palestinians in the land as possible in order to have that solid demographic majority. And in the West Bank, it's even harder, right? It's much harder to get these Palestinians to leave. And we're seeing a slower approach, a slower burn approach. So, for example, there's what just happened in Taibe, right? The persecution of many Palestinian Christians in this little village that is the biblical town of Ephraim. And to settler violence there, the reason for that settler violence is to scare Palestinians, to get them to immigrate, right? Because that's the only way they'll leave. It's much harder for the IDF to come in and just mass expel because the world would get very angry, right? So these little episodes of settler violence with the intent for immigration is what they're going for. And it's what they have done over the past 50 years in the West Bank. So the struggle over demographics has been the central focus of Zionism since its inception. Theodor Herzl, David Ben-Gurion, they understood that we need a Jewish demographic majority. So in 1948, what did that mean? That meant the expulsion of 800,000 Palestinians from Israel proper, right? The first Nakba, right? But that's continued ever since, right? After the annexation of the West Bank, there has been a complete impetus to try and get Palestinians to move. And after October 7th, they had the best green light in the world, right? To expel 2 million Palestinians from Gaza. And so off the bat, starvation was their weapon. Physical genocide was also another weapon, right? Every tool at their disposal to decrease the Palestinian population in order to ensure a solid Jewish demographic majority and domination of the land from the river to the sea. That is their goal.
Yeah. Okay. All right, Jadd, let me ask you this question. I've asked Elijah and I have talked about this before. I don't think I've ever convinced him, but I'm curious to get your thoughts on this. I swear I think Hamas is fake. I think and if not fake, I think they are a creation of Netanyahu and Likud party and the United States and everybody to have a boogeyman, to have an enemy, have somebody that they can blame for everything. Like, I got a flat tire the other day, I can blame Hamas for that. You know, it's like somebody to blame for everything. In order to do it, a couple things. One is that keeps the United States spigot of money, $3.8 billion a year, able to be sent because, hey, we've got to help them defend against Hamas. Secondly, you can't just kill innocent civilians if there's not a underlying thing to be going after. And that's what Hamas is. And the third reason I think that is it's like, where are they? Like, nobody even knows who's leading Hamas. Their entire leadership now has been wiped out 3 times. Like, honestly, I bet you if I went on Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, Megyn Kelly, any talk show, Fox, anything, and I said, name the leader of Hamas, nobody knows. Nobody even knows who's running anything. They don't have a spokesperson. It's not like I love the Houthis. When they blow something up, they have that one Yemenis dude who comes out and he's like, and it's like, it's hilarious, but dude's the spokesperson. It's somebody that I can see who's a Houthi. I don't know, man. And when I say fake, I'm saying I think Netanyahu's cut a deal with a certain group of people, and then they're the ones that are the quote-unquote Hamas. But I don't know. What do you think?
Well, it wouldn't be shocking. I mean, listen, what we know for a fact, of course, is that Netanyahu did prop up Hamas. We know this is as true as anything else. This is the same Netanyahu who took money himself from Qatar. And so it obviously adds up that he is somebody who needs Hamas for his own political viability. We have Hamas in Gaza. That way we can do this. Number one, we can split up the West Bank from Gaza politically. But then number two, we can always use that as an excuse that we don't have a viable partner for peace in Gaza, right? It's the same reason why, of course, they understand that Hamas it's something that grew as a resistance movement, but now has been kept, I think, by Netanyahu as really an Israeli asset to say that, hey, we're going to use these guys as our excuse to bulldoze and ethnically cleanse. Because you're right, all the main leaders who we've talked about, Yahya Sinwar, his brother Mohammed Sinwar, Mohammed Dave, Aruri, all of these guys who have been killed, who we know are dead, Ismail Haniya, all of these guys are dead. But the problem is, and I said this before, I think when Yahya Sinwar was killed, it was a big blunder by Israel because they knew at that point when they killed him that a lot of their excuses to kill even more had now been erased. You got to keep him alive so you can keep propping up some reasons to attack. When they killed him, I would not be surprised if some people at the top of the chain were saying, what are you guys doing? Why are you taking this guy out? We need this guy for our assets. This is not even much of a conspiracy at this point. And what I will say, I'll actually go back to one thing really quick. We're talking kind of about what Israel wants, what Israelis want. The fact of the matter is that Netanyahu and his government, they can use fear, of course. And, there's polling that's been released. I just posted about this on my Instagram today. And this was polling that came out about 2 weeks ago. And it was asking Jewish Israelis what they thought about the starvation in Gaza. And there were 4 options. It asked, how concerned are you? How concerned are you? Are you very concerned, somewhat concerned, not very concerned, or not concerned at all? 56% of Israelis said they were not at all concerned. And then an additional nearly 30% said, they said not very concerned. Only 20% said they were either very concerned or somewhat concerned. This is not just a Netanyahu thing.
Yeah.
There's a reason these guys get elected, right? I mean, they're not just being nominated out of thin air here. And so there's a bigger issue going on. But Hamas, I think you're definitely onto something there because it absolutely has posed fear into Israeli society. And the more fearful Israeli society, the better it is for Israel's interest. They have more excuses that way.
Yeah, you always have to have fear. Maybe you nailed it. Maybe they started off as a true resistance organization in 1987 when they were formed and all that. And then maybe over the years, Netanyahu, God, that dude has been in the game forever. I mean, I've said this before. I'm going to say it again. I think the guy's one of, if not the most disgusting human being on the planet, but he's a generational talent politician. He just unfortunately is. And, maybe he went to them years ago and cut a deal and said, okay, hey, we're going to let you guys keep going. We're going to let the Qatar money flow. You'll be fine. You'll be taken care of and you can do whatever you want. But here's the game. Oh man, I don't know. All right, let's shift a little to New York politics. And Elijah, why don't you give us your thoughts? Like Zoran Mondani, I mean, this guy's obviously everywhere. I think he really put himself on the map in that debate, the Democratic candidate debate, where they basically went and asked, and I might even insert it into the podcast here, but they asked all the candidates, as New York City mayor, what would be your first place to visit or your first something in office? And everyone was like, Israel, 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 Israel. And then he's like, I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying in New York and I want to handle the New York thing. Anyway, I thought that was amazing, but honestly, that's all I really know about him. So Elijah, give us kind of, I know you even worked on his campaign, but I mean, just give us a crash course in him. What's he all about? What do you think? And give me the good and the bad, if there is any bad.
Yeah. And since I worked on his campaign, I might get in trouble for sharing anything bad, but I will say you hit it spot on the head. There were 2 main issues that I think were on the ballot in this election. The first was Israel, right? The first was Israel-Palestine. And we saw a resounding pushback against AIPAC, against the pro-Israel political establishment through the election of Zoran. More than anything else, that's what Zoran indicates. The second issue was affordability, right? New York is one of the most expensive cities in the world. Basic things like food, busing, all these basic concepts are unaffordable for everyday Americans in New York. And so more than anything, he simply hammered home that message that I'm going to do my most as a politician to make your everyday life easier. Free busing, right? City-run grocery stores to make your fruits, your vegetables, your chickens, everything cheaper for you, right? Whatever I can do in my power as mayor, I will do to make your life easier and more affordable. In terms of the Israel issue, I think that, especially amongst our generation, amongst people below the age of 40, That was why they were so energized at Zoran. Finally, someone came out and pushed back against the establishment and finally said, I'm not taking AIPAC money. Not only am I not taking AIPAC money, I am going to stand up and say, I want to put the citizens that I'm representing before a foreign interest. We love that, right? Finally, someone's actually looking out for us, right? Which the boomers apparently can't comprehend or grasp. And when I was working for Zoran, it's actually a very interesting story. I phone banked for him. So I was calling New Yorkers to advocate for Zoran. And New York's a very Jewish city. It's the most Jewish city in the world. And most of the people I was calling were Jewish. And a lot of the pushback I got against Zoran was from older Jewish individuals. Younger Jewish individuals actually were loving him. They're like, yeah, I'm going to go out and vote for him. But it was the older Jewish demographic, I would say above 60 years old, that really gave me the most pushback. And one woman, I think she was probably an 80-plus-year-old Jewish woman, she told me, this was a verbatim quote, that I'm, quote, no better than a Palestinian by working for him. She knew I was Jewish. And the first thing I said back to her was, well, to me, that's a compliment, right? The Palestinian people are the bravest people on the planet. So I really love the fact that you're comparing me to such an admirable people. So thank you for that. And then I hung up the phone because I'm like, this woman is beyond the
man. She must have gone crazy. So when you phone bank, I mean, what is literally you're calling people and talk us through that? Like, pretend you just called me. What does that go like?
Yeah. And so if you're a New Yorker, I would typically ask you, what are your primary concerns before I even touch on Zoran, right? And I'm saying in a political candidate, what would you like to see? What is your go-to issue, right? And so if you mention Israel, I would craft a speech for that to say, like, look, this is what Zoran's approach is to Israel. And most of the time, it's not a positive view of Israel most candidates have. If it's, oh, I can't afford X, Y, and Z, I would give the step-by-step playbook of how Zoran is addressing that issue. If your issue is housing, I'm going to tell you his plan for housing, how to make housing more affordable. If it's busing, right? You can't afford busing in the city, right? I'm telling you his plan for busing. If it's basic stuff like halal food, right? He has a plan to decrease halal food by $2 by simply giving ownership of the actual carts to halal shop owners, right? And that would actually decrease the average dish at a halal restaurant in New York by $2, right? Everything that you think is important, I'm trying to spill out to you that Zoran is representing in his campaign. So no matter what your issue is, Ray, I know you're big on Israel, so I would give you statements by Zoran about how he's very critical of Israel, how he's trying to put New York first. That's the message I would craft to you.
Yeah. And so these people, it's so funny. It's like my concept of New Yorkers. I can't even believe they take the calls.
Yeah.
Like, I would think they'd be like, why the fuck are you calling me? And just hang up immediately. That's hilarious. But from what I've seen, there's a huge base of Jewish New Yorkers that support Zoran. I mean,
yes.
you don't see those numbers. I mean, you definitely don't see them on Fox News or Newsmax or the New York Post or any of the right wings. They're not going to push that. But even the CNNs and all those guys, I don't see them really pushing it that much, but I think it's true, right?
Yes, it is. Almost 50% of Jewish New Yorkers were voting for Zoran, specifically younger demographics. That below 40 demographic loves Zoran. And there's a variety of political reasons for that, right? This generation is more, we could say more disconnected from Israel, right? They're growing up alongside other Gen Zers who are also very critical of Israel. They're engaging in those conversations. And I think they simply feel safe with Zoran, right? Under people like Andrew Cuomo, under Eric Adams, right? By elevating Jews to this pedestal to say, oh, we got to protect Jewish Americans above every other people, right? In response to what happened after October 7th, Jews have become a target because of political actions like that, right? It makes us very visible to say, oh, I'm going out of my way to allocate resources towards Jewish protection, towards making sure Jews specifically stay safe. And someone like Zoran saying, I want everyone in my city, no matter if they're Jewish, Muslim, Christian, no matter what ethnicity, I want everyone to be equal. I think a lot of Jews say, yes, this is how we can be safe, right? That political message, making us no different than anyone else in the city, is something we really vibe with. And it's something that we can feel safe with. And so I think Zoran has really crafted a perfect message for Jewish Americans to feel comfortable and safe under his leadership. And that's especially why I love him. I think that's a great message going forward.
Okay. So at this point, it's going to be him versus Eric Adams. Is that the race? Is there a Republican candidate?
There is. It's like this Italian guy who wears like some weird cap. Yeah, he's weird. But he's got no shot. In fact, they polled Republicans in New York. Behind that candidate, Zoran is polling second amongst Republicans in New York, right? Ahead of Eric Adams and Andrew Cuomo, right? So this really shows that a populist, affordability-centered message can capture a wide coalition of voters, right? Even if they're not just Democrats or leftists, right? Even into the Republican sphere. And I've always said this, right? When Bernie was going against Joe Biden in that primary, you saw a lot of Trump people coming out to support Bernie. Why was that? Right? Because he centered populist economics at the heart of his message. Affordability, Medicare for all, these basic issues where your bank account is benefiting. Republicans that are typically on the poor side love that, right? They'll gravitate to that. And we're seeing that play out with Zoran 100%.
Okay. The other thing about Zoran, and Jadd and I were talking about this before we jumped on. I mean, it's like, how is the Democratic Party not supporting him? You know, this is like one of your guys. And that's where someone like, especially Hakeem Jeffries, that guy is such a clown to me. Like, it's so obvious that your AIPAC money that you're receiving, which I think is close to $2 million, you know, that's why you're not supporting this guy. That's the only reason. Jadd, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous, obviously. The Democrats, I mean, first of all, it's amazing to me how the American people are not stupid when it comes to this, because what you see, it's so interesting. Typically what you'll see is as a president gets less and less popular, the opposing party will get more popular. Yet somehow, even with Trump getting more unpopular, the Democrats are just, I mean, they're at rock bottom. I think their approval is close to 20%. I mean, it's just the American people are not buying this whole
point. That's a great point.
Yeah.
Like Trump is going down. The MAGA party's getting split in half. And it's like among the Democrats, the only person making noise is Gavin Newsom. Gavin Newsom is making some noise, and his social media team, honestly, they're pretty hilarious. They're clowning the hell out of Trump. But you're absolutely right. You don't see the Democratic Party. You actually don't see him going for the jugular and going for the kill. So you have to step back and say, well, why is that? Well, it's because Trump's getting killed on the Israel topic, and they're not going to go for the jugular because their bread is buttered by the same matzo ball.
Yeah, that's true. No, it's true, right? And I think I'm not sure if you guys watched, but the Breaking Points interview with U.S. Senator Alyssa Slotkin from Michigan.
Yeah.
I mean, she probably, God bless the staff member that put her on that call, because they're definitely out of a job now.
Yeah, that staff member got fired because she just.
But doesn't that just show you how, you know, the Democrats, they know now they can't just go on for a friendly interview anymore. They know, hey, why are you supporting? I mean, Alyssa Slotkin couldn't even answer. I mean, first of all, she denied that there was a genocide. And then when asked about sending weapons to Israel, she couldn't even say, no, we're not going to send more weapons to Israel. She's actually taking a more hawkish stance than even someone like Chuck Schumer, honestly. I mean, it's wild. And so, and she tries to pose, she goes, well, I wasn't backed by AIPAC. Okay. As if she hadn't received any AIPAC money prior. Also, she actually had.
Yeah.
So she wasn't even being completely honest there. It just goes to show you that Democratic voters now, there's a reason why Democrats, I mean, I don't know, in the state of Texas, we have Beto O'Rourke, who's been a prominent Democratic name here, who ran for governor in 22. And he did a speech in Fort Worth recently, and he mentioned Gaza, and he was talking about recognizing a Palestinian state. And it got the biggest applause out of any moment during the dialogue in Fort Worth, Texas, which is typically a more conservative city.
Yeah.
That's what people look at. I mean, Gaza is becoming the litmus test. Look at Pete Buttigieg, who was interviewed about a week ago by guys on Pod Save America, couldn't give at all an answer on Palestine, said, well, we got to think about it.
He was such an embarrassment. He was such an embarrassment.
He got grilled. And the comments are just, yep, this is not my candidate for 2028. And that's a beautiful thing. That's a beautiful thing.
And he released a statement and kind of like he almost a little bit walked it back, but was still so wishy-washy. Like he did not help his cause at all.
No, I didn't even know that. He did it. Actually, it's funny. You know what it reminded me of? It reminded me of that CEO who got caught at the Coldplay concert having an affair. And then the dude releases a statement the next day and says, I apologize. But then in the next paragraph, but I feel like my privacy was really, stolen from me, and I should not have to worry about being caught with my side chick at a Coldplay concert. It's like, dude, read the room. Nobody gives a shit that your privacy was compromised. You shouldn't be having an affair.
It's just, it's wild though, when you think about this, how Democrats now, it seems like such a layup at this point. I mean, like we always say, the Israelis themselves, more and more, the Israeli human rights groups are willing to say it's a genocide. Barely. I mean, by the way, Catherine Clark, who is the #2 ranking Democrat in the House, right behind Hakeem Jeffries, called it a genocide in a town hall and then got so much flack, she walked it back in a later statement about a few days later. I mean,
wow.
Yeah, Catherine, you can look this up. Catherine Clark walked back her statement.
Flack from donors, right? From her donor class, not from her actual constituents, right? And that's
yeah. Her constituents, I think, liked it.
Yeah, but the donors didn't. Okay, you know what? That's on brand. That makes total sense. All right, let's talk a little bit about Atidna, because I do want you guys to talk about that, because I don't know if that's how you guys met, but I want you guys to tell us about the organization, and we'll start with Elijah and then go to Jadd. And then I also want to talk about like Turning Point USA and what your thoughts are on that organization. And then also that organization that is at every school. I forget the name of it, but it's the Jewish Powerhouse Young Organization. What is that thing called?
There's a lot of them.
Supporting Israel, Mishlanu. There's a lot of these.
Hillel?
Yeah, Texas.
What is it called? Bilal or something?
Hillel.
Hillel. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I want you to tell us about that. But let's start with Atidna, and then Elijah, I know you got a couple things you want to plug, and go ahead and plug those.
Sure. Before we get into it, I can do the plugging. So Atidna is currently hosting a few fundraisers. One is for funding Atidna's operations in peace building and dialogue. Half the money we raise in that fundraiser will actually be going to the Gaza Soup Kitchen. It's an organization that feeds hungry children in Gaza. It's a fantastic group. If you have spare change, if you don't want to donate to Atidna, you can donate to them directly. They're doing fantastic work. We're also doing another fundraiser for a Palestinian Christian family in the West Bank who had their multiple cars and their equipment torched by Israeli settlers. And now they've been left basically without a means for a stable income. And so Atidna has taken the initiative to raise money for this family in the West Bank. I recently held an interview with the father of the family who basically had his property destroyed by settlers, and they're amazing human beings. So if you want to give money to them, we're accumulating it and going to give it to them. But in terms of Atidna and what we do,
I'll get all of those links. I'll put them in, and then I'll make posts on the Deep Shallow Dive Instagram. Dude, those settlers are menaces, man. Right. They are menaces to society.
They're insane, man. And they've only gotten more emboldened after October 7th. It really is a combination of insane propaganda. Settlers have the most warped mindset, and they truly believe it. Have you ever seen videos by like Daniela Weiss? She says you have to brainwash. You have to brainwash, right?
Yeah, she does.
Insane. And it's a combination of that alongside fear. They truly believe that by simply living with non-Jews, not even just Palestinians, non-Jews in general, they'll be at the mercy of them. They'll be killed, right? So it's a kill or be killed situation. So that's why they're so violent. It's this insane mindset, and they truly are propagandized. It's insane. But regarding Atidna, I've spoken about it many times on the Deep Shallow Dive podcast, but we're a group that's based on college campuses, dedicated to bring together Jews and Arabs, Israelis and Palestinians, to have a dialogue about anything and everything pertaining to Israel and Palestine. At our core, we are a free speech group. We believe in talking with the quote unquote other, because it's my belief that by having that conversation, we learn we're not all that different. We learn that what's dividing us is really many times artificial, right? Our commonalities are what come through in the conversation, and that's humanizing. It's so much harder to hate someone that you see as part of your family rather than someone you see as your other or as an enemy. And that's the power of dialogue. And it's our generation that really needs to pick up the slack where previous generations failed and have these conversations to finally solve these issues that have been permeating for over 7 decades. And that's in my eyes, the beauty of Atidna. We've been going strong for over 3.5 years now. We're at 13 college campuses. Up until this past year, the Atidna chapter at UT Austin, our first chapter, was led by me and Jadd. And a secondary aspect of our work alongside the dialogue is peace building. We bring together both peoples to solidify that we're one family and not inherent enemies. And we've done a variety of peace events. We've done joint memorials to honor all innocents that have been killed. We've done events where we bring peace activists from the Holy Land, both Jewish and Palestinian, to talk about the work they're doing. And we've also done some crazier events, like we've hosted a tent between an Israeli and Palestinian protest against each other, bringing together both sides with a sign that says, and me and Jadd led this event, we had a sign that said, "One Jew, one Palestinian, 2 brothers, ask us anything," inviting both sides to come in, just sit down, have a conversation with a Jew and a Palestinian in a civil and equitable environment.
That's amazing. So what happened? Did people come and ask you guys questions? Was there?
Yeah. I'll let Jadd take that one because we had some
Yeah.
interesting interactions. I'll
Well,
let him cover that.
we had people, all right, that's for sure, and mostly civil, I will say. You know, listen, Elijah and I, we are always trying to be as authentic as possible. We pretty much call it a spade, and that's what we believe. And I'll give you one example of where sometimes things don't always go as planned, and that was with one young lady who walked up to us, an Israeli lady who was our age, I believe. And, you know, she immediately was fairly emotional with us and sort of frustrated, I would say. Immediately kind of starts attacking us and saying, you know, you guys are platforming terrorism. You guys are apologizing for Hamas. You guys are doing all this stuff. And I mean, she wouldn't even look me in the eye at first because I'm Palestinian and I was wearing a keffiyeh. And so most of the anger actually was really directed at Elijah more so than me. And she was really frustrated with him. And Elijah kind of goes into detail about his own experience growing up Jewish, kind of having sort of a change in his perception of the conflict. And also Elijah has lived in the West Bank for a few months at a time. I guess Elijah now has left for just a little bit, unfortunately.
Yeah, okay.
We'll
He'll
get him
come
back.
back on. Yeah, he'll come
Yeah,
back
yeah.
on. Keep going.
But yeah, so Elijah like tells his story both from a personal perspective as a Jew, but also, you know, sort of a lived experience and also just understanding different things. And as we continue to speak to this girl, a kind of a crowd begins to form around us. I would say maybe 30 to 40
Wow.
Israelis / pro-Israel people wearing, you know, Israel flags, capes, you know, all this sort of stuff. They were not exactly thrilled with us. And Elijah and I mean, and this is all on tape, actually, funny enough. So we can even like pull up the YouTube video sometime and, you know, I can show you some other
Yeah.
time, right? Because this went on for about 30 minutes total. This group just begins berating us. I mean, going after us. And it's just the typical slander that you hear. We're anti-Semites. We're Hamas terrorists. Elijah is a capo, really a sellout Jew, basically.
Yeah.
And it just got really bad to the point where I actually had to go into the Israeli tent and grab the rabbi and tell him, like, hey, can you come get your crowd, basically, because they are not
My
leaving us
gosh.
alone.
Yeah.
And one of the guys literally was about to get into a physical altercation with Elijah. And so it really got kind of, it just escalated far more than we would have expected. And eventually it calms down after about 30 minutes or so. And, you know, thankfully that was really the only kind of skirmish that we had. But it got really intense. And that kind of goes to show you that certainly not everybody is receptive.
And when was this? When was this?
This was April of last year. So yeah,
Okay,
April.
okay. So about a year after, or maybe 7, 8 months after October 7th. Okay.
Correct.
You know, it's interesting to think like, you know, these kids that feel so passionately the opposite of the way you two feel. It's like the question is, I guess they just were brought up like that. Like, do they not have, and I don't know, I heard of this, but do they not have I guess the wherewithal to kind of think for themselves? Is that brainwashing so deep that you can't even think for yourself? Like you can't even see like like that video a couple weeks ago of that child I think in Gaza where his arm was blown off and he was on the street. I'm like, how does anyone look at this and not be just horrified? Like the kid's arm is blown off. There's no anesthetics. You're on a dirty street. Like it's just insane. And it just makes me wonder whether it's those kids or quite frankly, whether it's somebody my age. Some of my friends, when I sent them that, I'm like, how does this not shake you to your core? Like imagine imagine this being your child. I don't know, man. It's pretty crazy. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
And
It's a
take
lack of
someone like
humanity there.
Take someone like
Elijah, go ahead.
Mary Weiss. She has a publication called The Free Press, and they published an
Yeah.
article, I believe it was either 1 or 2 days ago, basically trying to attribute the starvation in Gaza not to famine, but they're giving examples to sow seeds of doubt of how there's these comorbidities or these pre-existing conditions causing
Yeah.
causing children to starve, which is just it's
I
heinous.
saw that.
It's starvation.
Barry Weiss is such a shill. She's such a paid shill. And for them to try to spin the narrative that the situation with the kids in Gaza right now are pre-conditions that they had previous. Actually, somebody came out and they said, yeah, you know what? You're right. The condition for this one child was a pre-existing condition, but it was because the child was shot in the head by a sniper bullet. So that's
Yeah.
the pre-existing condition they had.
Shrapnel
It's
from
just
like missiles.
insane. But
Crazy. Yeah.
yeah,
Shrapnel. Yeah.
I
Shrapnel
will
from
say
missiles.
this, man. Shrapnel from missiles, exactly. I will say this, their propaganda is good. Like, they're good. They are good at spinning, and their spin mastering is really good, and they have an answer for everything. Okay, let me go back to something, Jadd, and I don't know if you know this, but this redistricting in Texas, I really haven't followed this that close. Like, do you have a handle on this that you could kind of give us the deep shallow dive 101 on this redistricting in Texas?
Yeah, I can kind of give just some brief thoughts on that. So you're right. Right now in the state of Texas, we have 38 seats really in the U.S. Congress, and 24 of them are Republican. I believe 13 of them may be Democrat. There may be one vacant seat as of now. So I guess it's 24 to 13 to one vacant seat. Typically, as we know, states are typically supposed to be the borders drawn every 10 years or so, based off of the census. And so the borders that we have now in our state are based off the 2020 census. Governor Abbott, however, in this state, really at the request of President Trump, actually, he is trying to see if he can actually create 5 more Republican seats in this state. And just to give you some background, in 2024, roughly 56% of the vote went for Republicans in Texas, yet Republicans have roughly 63% of the seats. And I will actually say that there are states on both sides that do this. Illinois is actually a really bad state that does this as well. I think about 52% of the vote was for Democrats, and yet over 80% of the seats are for Democrats. It's something that both sides have done.
Got it.
But sort of the reason why people, I believe, are more outraged is because of the fact that they're doing this in 2025 when we haven't had a census, basically. And as far as I'm aware, it is legal. It is something that can be done, but it is seen really as a cheap way of doing this, especially because it really comes from President Trump himself saying, I want 5 more Republican seats. And so now the borders have been drawn in a way to where really 5 Democratic seats are going to be pretty much drawn out to be now Republican seats, although some of them may be more competitive than others. The Democrats in Texas, as many people know, fled the state for a while to prevent there being a quorum on voting for this. However, they've now returned to where there is a quorum and it's been approved. And it's really it's tough because ultimately both parties have been doing this for some time. But the real issue, I think, for most people is that it's happening at such a strange time in the middle, in 2025,
Okay.
essentially. And
Okay.
the frustration, of course, also comes at a time when Trump's approval rating is getting worse and worse. And now it's sort of it's sparked its own battle in California now, where there's a proposal to add 5 more Democratic seats to California, and you have other Democratic governors who are talking about trying to draw up their lines. This really could be sort of a nationwide battle here.
Wow.
The unfortunate
Okay.
reality is that gerrymandering it's something that is so common now, and it's very difficult to stop just because the legal procedures to stop it are not exactly that clear. Really, as long as you're not racially gerrymandering, for the most part, political gerrymandering is fine, even though it screws over a lot of people. So it's just been a complete showdown here at the Capitol, basically, and I've been able to watch some of it unfold. It's something that I think we're going to see in a lot of states coming up, especially California, as I mentioned,
Yeah.
maybe New York. We'll have to see. So it's been kind of a whirlwind.
It's just another part of the shit show that is the United States right now. It really is. By the way, gerrymandering, do you have a dumbed down definition of that? What exactly is that?
Well, gerrymandering essentially, I can tell you what, the word gerrymander, if I'm getting this correct, it came at a time when there was a district that was being drawn in one of the states. It may have been in the Northeast, where the district itself looked like a salamander, basically. And I think the man who drew it up, maybe his last name was Jerry, and so they nicknamed it gerrymander, basically, and the
funny.
name just stuck. Essentially, gerrymandering, it's drawing up a line that really, essentially what it's doing is instead of the voters choosing their representatives, the representative gets to really choose who votes for them. Doing so, I mean, I can tell you this, in North Texas, where I live in the Dallas area, in 2020, the race that was in my congressional seat 24 was decided by 1%. The Republican candidate won by 1%. They then redrew the line to be a Republican plus 19 district. And so now it's just a complete safe district. And they do that essentially by drawing out the line to include some of the areas that are wealthier, more so
Got it.
white majority. And they do it in a way to where they can afford to get some more votes in that seat. And so it's a very, I mean, it's you almost have to, it's almost a precise sort of activity. But now with AI, I mean, it's probably super easy, right? You could just kind of put in an input and get
They know who's voting where, and so they basically just carve up the pie to their advantage. Okay, dude, amazing. All right, listen, guys, we are coming up on 1 hour, so I wanted to kind of keep this at that. All right, I'm going to give you both the last word. Anything you want to share? Why don't we start with Elijah? Give us any final thoughts. I know we didn't really get into the Syria thing, but maybe we'll do that another episode.
Yeah.
I can make that a brief last word. I can give you my
Okay,
thought.
go for it.
So yeah, just a quick recap what's been going on in Syria. There's a town called Sweda. It's a primarily Druze town. Druze are an ethno-religious minority. They have their own faith. It's an offshoot of Shia Islam, but it's over 1,000 years old, and they have their own faith. And there was some tick-for-tack kidnappings with a group of Arab Bedouin tribes close to the city. So they're on the road, and like an Arab Bedouin would come in and kidnap a Druze, and then a Druze would kidnap an Arab Bedouin, and then that escalated, right? And then there was all-out violence between the two communities. Then the leader of Syria, the new leader, Ahmed al-Shara, came in, basically sent in military forces. And the problem with the military forces is that it's this hodgepodge amalgamation of basically all these foreign fighters, domestic fighters, and you can't really account for all of them, right? So some of them are ex-ISIS fighters, right? And like these ex-ISIS fighters, they just want to kill Druze, right? They're there to massacre, right? I'm someone who was pretty, I would say, cautiously optimistic early on about Ahmed al-Shara. Assad was a devil, genocided over 500,000 Syrians, and so I was very happy to see him go. But of course, he has a background that is Islamist extremist, right? Al-Qaeda, ISIS, right? Very, very, very far Islamic groups that are not good, very bad. And he's really shown fecklessness at this situation. Israel came in and decided to start bombing his forces as they were being sent into Sweda. Israel wanted to claim that they're the protector of the Druze. So they were, Israel's real intent was to annex territory, right? To get the Druze to foment a revolt, to side with Israel, and then Israel could claim, oh, we have to come in, set up basically a wall and annex this territory or create a Druze state, right? Something that's a buffer with the Islamist Syria. And it's been a shit show. There's been massacres of Druze that were horrific. I interviewed a Druze journalist who basically detailed, his word was a genocide. What's going on in Sweda. I was emotional during the whole thing. I felt so depleted. And sadly, the leader of Syria, I truly believe that he's really just becoming, at this point, a feckless leader in Syria, but also someone who's beholden to foreign interests, most notably Saudi Arabia and the United States. And so I'm someone who's becoming more illusioned with him as time goes on. And he really needs to either put his money where his mouth is and protect all the citizens of Syria, or he needs to have a democratic Syria and step down. So it's a brutal situation, man. But that's a quick overview. Happy to get more in detail on my thoughts, but I'll leave it at that.
All right, fair enough. And my only addition to that is I look at that al-Sharia guy. I actually called that from the beginning to pat myself on the back a little bit.
There you go.
But I look at that guy as just another, puppet that got put in. He's buddies with Trump. He went from being on the, top 5 terror list to wearing Tom Ford suits and having meetings with Trump. And he was put in and said, okay, you do this, you do this, you do this, start killing these Druze. And to me, Netanyahu could be quarterbacking all of that the same way I said he's quarterbacking the stuff with Hamas. But okay, Elijah, that was a great recap. All right, Jadd, floor is yours. Any closing remarks?
Listen, all I'm going to say is that I think it's important now more than ever for the American people to really understand where their news is coming from. I mean, please, we're in an era now where the mainstream media is dead, and it sort of deserves that. It's, the CNNs, the MSDNCs, the faux news. It's all shown itself to be really just corporate media that is able to control a narrative. Independent media, people who are actual journalists who are digging up the details, Deep Shallow Dive, for example, doing the great work because of the people that, for example, are able to be brought on to a show like this, that you have people who are actual veterans or are doctors, people who are on the grounds talking about what they see. This is the journalism that's going to matter. And I highly encourage people who are listening to this to really try to expand your news to the point where you're getting people. I mean, even someone like, hey, Candace Owens, you don't got to love Candace Owens, but she really, she believes what she says, and she gets a lot of things right. I mean, especially on Israel, Palestine. And so that's somebody, for example, just because you see them getting slandered, that doesn't mean you turn away. In fact, there's probably a reason why they're getting slandered as much as they are. Tucker Carlson, the same thing. Leaving Fox News was the best decision for him to make. He's now probably the most famous journalist in the United States.
Absolutely.
This is what matters, right? And so I encourage people to reach out to different networks and to really different media outlets and try to get the full picture as much as possible while ditching the cable TV for this sort of thing. It's driving us to not get the full truth. And we should be all, at the end of the day, striving for what is true in this world, in this chaotic world we live in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, listen, I've told you guys this off the record. I'm going to say it on the record. I think the world of the two of you. You both are just so intelligent and so articulate and so well-versed and so nuanced that maybe what we can do is, I know you're both busy with your things, but heck, maybe once a month, have you guys come on, whether we do it collectively or individually. Also, I'd like to really start getting some more clips of the two of you to get on social media. You both deserve a much bigger following than you have. I know you're both growing your followings, and I know that's not even important to you, but I think you both need to be heard more. And I think you both bring such a unique perspective to this collectively as well as individually. But anyway, man,
Thank you, man.
I love the two of you. I do. I genuinely do. And I love talking to you. And I've learned so much from the both of you. Obviously, I've learned a lot from Elijah. Our relationship's gone a little further. But Jadd, I've really enjoyed our interactions. You and I will do a separate episode, just the two of us really digging into the Palestine stuff. But anyway, all right, guys. All right, everybody.
Much love, Ray. Thank you
Hope
so
you guys enjoyed it. You two stay on the line a second. All right, everybody. Call a spade, call your parents. By the way, that's my new additional tagline to this. Call a spade, and call your parents. You two do the same. Hang on, and we'll talk to you guys soon.
This episode was brought to you by Zippix Nicotine Toothpicks. Zip more, smoke less. Totally satisfying, discreet, and delicious. Zippix nicotine-infused toothpicks are available in 6 great flavors, each containing at least 2 milligrams of nicotine to curb those cravings. Zippix is FDA registered and proudly made in the USA. Use discount code DSD for 10% off your order at zippixtoothpicks.com. Zip more, smoke less, save 10%.